At some point, as a professional, there comes a day that you realize you need some sort of status bag. Today's not that day. We're making a trash panda bag. Anyone who's been following me on Instagram for any extended period of time will know that I have an obsession with embroidery. In particular, finding out the exact limitations of what my embroidery machine can and can't do. A few months back, while I was at Saks Fifth Avenue in New York City, I noticed that Dior was selling an embroidered handbag. This was really exciting because, as you know, I am obsessed with embroidery and I had no idea that any high-end designers did any embroidery for their handbags. This particular handbag is the Dior Embroidered Book Tote, and they have really cool and different embroidered designs in it in a beautiful blue or pink or classic black. The design ranges from tigers to constellations and flowers, all of them with some really rich embroidery. While I was admiring it, I did notice a price tag which was well over $3,000 US, which definitely put it out of my price range. However, I also just wondered, what if the design wasn't something so classy like constellations or the Dior logo? What if it was just raccoons? So confession, I really love raccoons and have always wanted one for a pet. I think this comes from watching a lot of Candy as a child, where she does have a pet raccoon. Now, while owning raccoons is illegal in the state of Illinois, I really want to have a bag that displays my love of raccoons proudly. I actually do collect animal-shaped handbags, whether they're by Kate Spade or Wicker Darling. I do think it's awesome to use a bag to show the world what animals you like, be it T-Rexes or flying pigs or lobsters or wombats that poop. But to my knowledge, none has ever made a bag shaped like a raccoon, much to my sadness. So I decided I need to make the Dior bag, this time covered with elegant raccoon embroidery. I was initially going to put the Sosteen logo that I plaster all over my business cards on it, but then friend and genius Angela Clayton reminded me that my name is Christine, which really has one letter difference from Christian. So why not put Christine Dior on the bag and make it just like absolute true parody? I thought it was freaking brilliant. Thank you, Angela. So I started looking into the embroidery on the original bag. It has a fantastic, almost sketchy quality to it. So I wanted to use it as a way of digitizing that would make things look like they've been drawn out with very small pencil lines, of course, in embroidery thread. Meanwhile, while on DeviantArt, I came across these incredible sketches of raccoons by an artist named Maria Paiza. So I turned these images into a sketch design using the photo stitch tool on my Palette 11 software. It's an automatic pattern generating wizard, so it's really all about just clicking and resizing and making sure I like how it looks. Generally, I loved it, but the eyes of the raccoons just didn't have enough oomph to it. So I drew out the eyes by hand and put them in the appropriate place, complete with big eye sparkles, so the raccoons look like they're begging for love, attention, respect, and trash. I did do some sample stitch outs of these to make sure that I liked the quality of it, and I loved it. I tried several weights of thread for these creations and found that a thinner thread like the Kimono 100 weight silk thread gave a finer, more sketchier text rather than my usual go-to, which is a thicker thread like the Tire 50 weight silks. So with that in mind, it was time to resize the rest of the bag and design it. But while we're talking about raccoons and using daily objects to signify things that I am passionate about,
I want to show off my new Raccoon iPhone case and talk about today's sponsor, Casetify. Casetify is an online shop that specializes in fabulous, protective, and customizable cases for your technology. They have such a beautiful array of different iPhone cases, including, of course, some incredible raccoon designs as well. I found the perfect case to go with my new bag on their site and ordered it immediately. But not only does it feature my favorite trash panda, it's also fall resistant with their incredible case technology. They've added Chi-Tech 2.0 shock absorbing protection to make the case drop proof for up to 9.8 feet, which has been incredibly handy when playing with my toddler, whose favorite hobby is giving me heart attacks by chucking phones onto the ground. They also specialize in biodegradable materials and have some cases that are entirely compostable. Even their non-compostable cases are made out of 65% recycled materials. They even have gorgeous cases filled with liquid and sand or glitter to fill all your desired style needs. With so many different designs, styles, and uses to choose from, I'm thrilled to offer you a special code today. Go to casetify.com/Sosteen to save 15% off your order. Thank you again to Casetify for sponsoring this video, and now let's make the bag.
The actual Dior bag comes in multiple sizes. The large one is 16 by 14 inches. However, this seemed a little bit big to me. The smaller one comes in what I think is just a perfect size, which is 14.5 inches by 11 inches, and it's of course 7 inches thick. I decided to go with this size for my personal bag. After playing with the placement of the different raccoons for the design, I chose this layout for the front of the bag and the back of the bag, which is of course identical. To make the Christian Dior logo, to make the Christine Dior logo, I digitized the letters myself, drawing each one out. To turn the Christian to a Christine, I made my very own letter E, which I did by figuring out how wide and thick to make the lettering and making a convincing letter E myself. I was actually rather proud of this. I was pleased. I did some experimenting to figure out how dense to make the stitching to make it as convincing as possible to the original. The original plan that I made was to sew the bag itself and then put the logo around it once it was completed. However, I went back to Bloomingdale's to admire the bag in person and noticed that this is not how the original bag was done. No, the logo is in fact embroidered on top of the other embroidery and there was no band around it. So this meant that I had to change my digitizing. With that thought, I went back to the drawing board and came up with this design. Now, the plan was to put the logo smack in the middle of it after I finished embroidering all 4 raccoons on top of it. I used 5 of the images I digitized to make the sides and the bottom of the bag, which of course is one piece, actually 2 pieces with a seam in the middle. These all had to be embroidered as well. After that, it was time to start embroidering. For this project, I chose a really thick cotton canvas that I got from fabric.com in a marvelous and warm cream. I used a tearaway stabilizer and then layered the 2 together, then stitched it out using the aforementioned 100 weight kimono silk thread, since I figured that my classy raccoons deserve classy silk thread. The thread was by far the most expensive part of the project. I think I spent $14 on the fabric itself and $105 on the threads for this project. Had I not spent so much time embroidering out the logos to wrap around by mistake, I would have honestly saved about $50. The final project should have cost me about $55 in thread for a whopping total of $69, including the fabric. So let's round that up to 70 and say that this project cost me 70. Now, believe it or not, this bag took forever to stitch out. Each raccoon took somewhere between 2 to 3 hours for my machine to sew. And with all the logos, the raccoons on all 5 sides of the bags, as well as the handles, I'd say that the embroidery time came to approximately 45-50 hours. It was a while, but it was worth it. I absolutely loved how all these pieces came out in the end. And every single time I looked at it, I just kind of grinned. So now that we have finished embroidering the pieces, let's put the pieces together. If you look at the bag, it appears the way that it's put together is that the sides are stitched wrong sides together, and then these finished edges are stitched down towards the front. This was even more apparent to me when I held the bag in person versus what I could see on the internet pictures. And the satin stitches on the edges were really beautiful and thick. This means that any raw edges will be enclosed by the satin stitched edge portion here on the front, and the inside of the bag will be nice and clean since all the wrong sides are together and without any raw edges. Altogether, very clever and altogether very expected for a $3,000 tote bag. While I don't have the best way to do a nice satin stitch on my machine, I don't really have an industrial machine designed to do a satin stitch like this. So what I did do was I used my Baby Luxe Soprano and put a really close zigzag stitch, 0.7 millimeters wide and 0.1 millimeters long, and then stitch the edges of the side twice with the silk thread to give it that satin stitch look. It's not quite clean and crisp as the original Dior bag, but whenever something doesn't quite turn out as classy as the original, I just remind myself, mine's a raccoon bag. To sew this, I started by cutting out all the pieces and prepping them. I measured out the dimensions and marked how I would cut out the bag front and back. While the finished bag should be approximately 14.5 inches wide, that's including all of the finished edges that are hemmed and finished. So for mine, I drew mine out 11 inches tall by 14 inches wide. I added 1 inch seam allowance to all of the sewn sides and 2 inches seam allowance to the top. I then used a ruler and a rotary cutter to cautiously cut this out. I did the same for the back. For the sides, I know that the finished bag will have a 7.5 wide edge. However, since my embroidery machine has a hoop width of about 8 inches, mine will probably be just a little bit smaller. I cut out that 8 inches wide, about, I'd say 25 inches long. You'll notice there are two side pieces to cover the right and left sides and the bottom. While I saw the bag in person, I did notice that there was a hidden seam on the very bottom of the bag, and I decided to use that to my advantage. After I did this, I then ironed in that 1/4 inch on the sides and then used the machine to zigzag stitch to sew in the satin edge on the sides of the bag, like I described. This did not take very long, but it felt very long. Once that was done, I then sewed the sides of the bag to the front. I matched up the black Christine Dior logo as precisely as I could, using pins to figure out the exact point and line them up as closely as I could. I then used a 2.5mm stitch with a strong 50 weight black silk thread to sew down the line I had drawn. The corners were a little tricky, but the secret is stopping about 1 inch from the end, which I've marked with a pen, and then folding down the next side before continuing with the machine again, rather than trying to get the 1/4 in one go. I stopped about 2 inches away from the middle on each side. I did that for the other side of the front. I then did the same for the back panel to the sides. Once all the sides were in, I then looked at the bottom of the bag. I figured out how long the bag had to be at the bottom and then sewed the two sides of the bag together. I cut one edge to 1 inch and the other to 3/8 of an inch and wrapped the raw edge of the shorter edge with the longer piece and then pinned it down for hand sewing later. I then used a machine to sew the bottom edge of the front and the back panels to this piece. Once that was all done, I used some sharp shears to trim down the front of the bag raw edge to 3/8 of an inch on all sides. I folded down the satin stitch edge of the sides around the raw edges of the front, hiding them, and pinned it. I then used a machine to sew it down as well. You can see this stitch on the bag. I personally think that the original designer bag only has this one stitch that I mentioned. Since if you look at the sides of the bag, you only see one row of stitching versus mine, which has two. Nonetheless, this is what I came up with, and I'll take it. Another difference between my bag and the original is that the original bag has some sort of thick coating on it on top of the embroidery. I don't know if it's a varnish or a glue or something, but the fabric is coated so that the embroidery doesn't catch on anything and also makes the bag a little stiffer. I personally had no idea how they did the coating. If you know, please let me know in the comments. So mine is sans coating, so it's a little bit more wibbly wobbly and it isn't as protected. To hem the top, I folded over the edge of the bag twice and did a machine stitch all the way around. The original Dior bag has two lines of stitching, one about 1/8 of an inch from the top and the other approximately an inch. I don't actually know for sure. I did not measure it at the store. I did mine the same way as well. Now, I did take some time to do some hand stitching to make sure some of the thicker points of the edging lay flat. Now it was time to add the handle. To do the handle, I had some raccoon side panels ready for me. Using a rope, I had figured out that I needed the handles to be approximately 14 inches for me to be comfortable carrying this bag. I have no idea how long the original one was. I did mine based on what I would use personally because this is my personalized bag. Since the rope I had has a tendency to unravel, I used E6000 glue to glue around the perimeter of the rope at the points I wanted to cut it. And once it was dry, I was safely able to cut the rope as I wanted it. Meanwhile, I cut 2 lengths of the Raccoon Embroidery, 20 inches by 2.5 inches wide. I did do the satin stitch over the top, bottom, and one of the sides. I then put in the rope in the length of my embroidered cotton fabric, wrapped it, and pinned it down. I stitched it down with a 2.5mm stitch and trimmed the non-satin stitched raw edge down as close as possible to the seam. I then used some 30 weight silk thread and a very fine size 9 needle to hand sew down the satin stitch edge. I'm absolutely certain this is not how the original bag was done, but it looked convincing enough and I was happy with it. I then hand sewed the handles to the bag and the whole Raccoon Christine Dior bag was done. Honestly, I am madly in love with this bag. I feel like it's glam enough that I can wear it anywhere with Louboutins or with any of my cottagecore or handmade daily cosplays. It's a really functional size that fits my laptop and book and wallet, my matching cell phone. I do wish my bag were coated like the original since a little bit of stiffness I think would really help with this bag. But I did put a piece of cardboard in the bottom to keep it in shape there. That being said, there is a $3,130 price tag difference between these two bags, so I think I can live with it. So thank you so much for joining me in today's sewing adventure. I had so much fun making this parody bag and I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you did like this video, please remember to give this video a like and remember to subscribe.